suppose, about older people and about how we see them in the aged care environment. And there's a piece in there about we see somebody who actually is in a wheelchair and looks very diminished and may not be communicating with us and may, from what we see, may look depressed and lonely and non-communicative. But in actual fact, it's that what we don't know about the people that's really, really important. And this particular lady, she actually, because I know her well, I knew that she had been in the army, so she'd been a great contributor. She'd been the matron, well, old-fashioned term, the matron of the Crown Street Mothers and Babies Hospital, which was a really big hospital in New South Wales, really important hospital. And she met my grandfather there. He was one of the, back then they were GPs, but she had this extraordinary history. She'd been to Papua New Guinea and she'd done all this wonderful stuff. And she ended up as a diminished old lady in an aged care facility in a nursing home, and she was at that time quite large. She'd had a stroke, so she was very quite dependent. She'd lost movement down one side and that sort of thing, so the stroke had a really, really big impact on her. But I knew what her history was, but I also knew that the staff that were incredibly busy and were rushing around and were trying to do their job and do it properly probably were going to struggle with the care that they were going to provide for her. She loved people, and even though she had no children herself, she really, really adored our family, but she was quite fit right up until she had her stroke. So her stroke was quite a critical moment in her life, and it really changed everything for her. She went really from being a strong participant in her community, but also in her own life, to really being a completely different person in a completely different world. So when she ended up in the aged care facility, she essentially had gone from eating prawns and oysters and good stuff because it affected her swallow and her speech, to eating basically what she called mush, which was, no matter how much they tried to present it in a nice way, it had completely lost all of the excitement for her. Because she couldn't swallow fluids, they gave her a plastic cup with a little feeding thing on it. And she really, she just hated that. And of course it was so diminishing as a human. It was just really degrading as a human being not to use a proper glass or a proper cup and that sort of thing. They didn't like her to drink alcohol, so the actual facility itself was a very difficult facility to be in, and so they acted in certain ways to stop her from being able to, I think, be an active participant in her life. So my mother used to actually call the facility at night and ask the nursing staff to go down and fill her glass with whiskey because the nursing staff wouldn't do it. What happened for her world was it just completely closed in. She lived in a little fishing village down in New South Wales. So what her view was, which was basically the sea and being able to go out and see things, became just a window with probably very little in there at all. In fact, I do know that she had a view of a corridor, so she had very little, and it was very difficult for her to get out and actually participate. So the big issue for her, really in her very final months, was that she spent most of her time in bed because she was a very heavy lady and the staff found it difficult to get her out of bed. Once they put her in a wheelchair, she was uncomfortable, and she was constantly asking the staff to move her around and to make her more comfortable and that sort of thing. She had some very favourite care workers that she really, really loved, but they restructured in the facility and those care workers were moved. And having been a matron before and ran a whole nursing program, she was really distressed that they had never talked to her about that. So one day she literally just never saw the care workers again because they'd been moved or had lost their jobs or something like that. So she was very, very distressed by that. She started just before, probably in the months before she died, the speech therapist didn't want her to eat they were very, very strict about what she could eat and drink, and she was very distressed about that. So she got herself an access cab she put herself in a wheelchair and got the staff to actually wheel her down. I think her sister came in and she went to a lawyer and got the lawyer to write up a thing to say to the facility that they had to give her access to risks and let her eat and drink what she wanted to, which actually meant she coughed and spluttered. But then the staff distanced themselves because they were fearful that she was going to choke, and I understand that, but it was so important to her that she could eat and drink normally and that sort of thing. She finally, I think, developed this terrible itch all over her body, and I can actually remember talking to her on the phone, and she was really, really distressed. And even in my role as Director of R&D, I rang the complaints department and rang a number of people. I spoke to what was maybe the Director of Nursing, and I found it almost impossible to resolve the issues for her, and I found that quite distressing because I would hope that I could resolve those issues for her if she was here at Helping Hand, and I think I could have, even not as a member of staff. I think people would have listened and would have given her those, I suppose, the opportunity to do those things. But basically, she was so unhappy and so distressed that she just basically gave up. She was hopeless. She stopped eating. She stopped drinking. She didn't make any more phone calls, and eventually she just died. So Mum was incredibly involved, and I found that really interesting because it wasn't till later that Mum told me things like, she broke her dentures, so I rang all the way from Adelaide to somewhere out in the middle of Queensland to get her dentures fixed. And I did reflect on that and think, why did the staff do that? Like, if she's got dentures and they were broken, why wouldn't they have sorted some of those problems out? So there was I suppose there were two issues for me. One was about those things that she wanted to do that was risky behaviour, and I totally understand the staff feeling distressed about that behaviour. However, as an individual with sound mind, you should be able to do as much of that as you really, really want to, and we have to really look long and hard into aged care and try and work out how we deal with that sort of thing, because if you're of sound mind, there's an interesting balance there. But the other piece in this actually was the things about all those little things that sometimes you don't think about when you're a staff member, but when you're actually a relative, they're so meaningful. So, the broken set of dentures, got 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, we'll do it as soon as possible. But as someone who actually can't eat and is not enjoying their food, it actually becomes something that minute by minute becomes quite distressing. So I think it's trying to, balance those things up and that sort of thing. But, and so the final thing I always want to say is that, trying to recognise how do we actually see that all older people are very different, they have different things. So whilst you might worry about the food with everyone, not everybody's interested in food. Other people might be interested in the fact that their dog has needed to be, they might have been euthanized before they came in, or they don't see it anymore. So how do we complement their life? It's really important that they have dogs in their life, but then they may never see a dog again. So trying to, I think, accommodate that people aren't all the same, that everybody has rights, and I think that's the issue really, is the rights perspective, a right to having some joy in your life, right to have fun in your life, right to be in control of your life. And having that control and being able to do what you really, really need to do, and to be listened to. And I think that's a really big challenge in this current environment where there's less and less time for staff. How do they actually sit down and listen to someone? So it's one thing to ask people and give them choices, but it's another thing to actually listen to them about why they made those choices. And I think that's really, really critical. And just hearing the stories, my favourite thing, the stories that people have to tell. Everyone's got a story, and it's really important. This is a sad end to a story, a good story right up until she turned maybe 79, but just in that year before she died, but then a terrible story at the end of her life. We do all these important things like assessments and care plans and things like that, but I'm not sure that always gets right down to what the really important things are. And we use terms like spirituality and enrichment and things like that, but we all have these really things that are really important to us, and some of them are just things like having a good pillow or reading certain books, where they like to read books, but we give them a great pile of books, but we don't necessarily give people the books they want to read, if you get my drift. So it's really getting into the nub of what it is. So Look, and I think we're coming a really good way towards that at Helping Hand. So we are actually, you know, through the top 5 and, you know, all of that sort of stuff, we're actually creating an environment where I hope we're actually getting right down saying to people, it's not about the clouds opening up and some wonderful thing happening to you. It's actually about those things that have really, really important meaning to you, the sorts of things you watch on TV, just our everyday lives. So that's what I hope, the top 5. I actually think that, and if they had followed that, I can tell you what the top 5 would have been for her. And it wouldn't have been hard. The top 5 just would have been the ability for her to sometimes, and they could have negotiated with her, you know, yes, she can eat prawns and things on a particular day, and maybe we'll have a staff member sitting with you, or your family can take that risk with you. She could have her whiskey at night, and I don't even know whether you could have even put a thickener into the whiskey, but there's, you know, 2 things that she could have pictures of her family around her. You know, they were pretty simple top 5, and I reckon probably a lot of our residents do have very simple top 5 meaning for them. So for my auntie Marge, I think the top 5 for her would have been that she was able to actually on occasions eat the things she really wanted to eat, which would have been things like prawns and oysters and that sort of thing. I think the second thing is that she just loved to have a drink, so that, and she didn't want to get drunk, she just wanted to be able to have a whiskey at night or maybe a nice red wine with somebody, so that would have been number 2. Number 3 was her family, which actually wasn't her family by blood, as it were, by relationship, but she still loved them, so having those pictures around her would have been really, really important. I think the other thing was, because she spent her life living in a coastal town, being able to, on the odd occasion, look, once a month, once every 2 months, to be able to have gone to the beach in some way, and an access cab might have been enough to do that. So I think that was probably the 4th. And the 5th was, she, like me, is a television addict. So I think the ability to be able to watch stuff on TV and have access. So she did have a little DVD player that my mum had sent over with a whole lot of DVDs. So it would have been quite simple to have actually just been able to have popped a DVD. And so they're really simple things. They're incredibly simple. And that's why I love the top 5 of all the stuff in there. That's the best. So I think it ties really nicely to a quote that Maya Angelou's lovely thing, which was, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people won't forget how you made them feel.